Well, let's get talking now. The Federal Competition and Consumer Protection Commission has recently authorized 173 digital lenders. Well, 119 lenders with full approval, 54 lenders with conditional approval. Well, we'll get to understand all of this to operate in the country, and an increase from the 106 players across that's announced earlier in January amid sanctions and calls to Nigerian fintech to block predatory digital lenders. The FCCPC verifies the digital lenders through its regulatory framework, double the limited interim regulatory registration framework and guidelines for digital lending 2022. Following the announcement, digital lenders were given a 90-day ultimatum to register for approval, which was later extended to January. I think there was another extension till March. But let's talk more about this and get more knowledge into what is actually playing out in this sector. I have the Executive Vice Chairman, who doubles as the Chief Executive Officer at the Federal Competition and Consumer Protection Commission, Mr. Babatunde Irukera. He's live in the studio. Good afternoon. It's good to have you in the studio.
Good afternoon. Thank you for inviting.
Yes, I think we'll start with, I remember clearly when the attack, your joint committee, when you visited some of this loan operators, and that happened there. But after that, what played out before we are now getting 173 meeting the guidelines and now following this new framework?
So the investigation started prior to the raids, and the Dawn raids. And so we had gathered some information, and the Dawn raids also provided additional information. Then the investigation continued. And there was more than one Dawn raid as we tracked some of the businesses. And what has happened and the information we've gathered and what we've seen is has led us to develop what is the limited and interim guidelines and registration process for digital lenders. Essentially what this is that the several things that were missing where people could just start the business anyhow are no longer the case. Now you need to identify who you are, we need to know who you are, who the shareholders are, who the directors are, where you are, where to find you. You have to show what your policies are, your loan recovery policies, your interest calculation policies, and certainly your redress mechanism when consumers are displeased, including demonstrate to us that the kind of application that you're using is not intrusive and does not extract otherwise irrelevant information or compromise the privacy of consumers, whether they themselves or third parties who have provided the information to them. And so people, those who have gone through that process have been approved. Some are still incoherent, conditionally, meaning that we've demonstrated substantial compliance, but your approval is not final until you demonstrate full compliance.
Great stuff. How receptive were these guys talking about this? Because many would say when there is law, some people like to operate in a lawless environment. Would you say they really took this hook line, they wanted to come in?
And so there were a few who were credible and who thought that the bad name for the industry was damaging their brand. And then there were others who were outside of the operations who wanted to come in, but because they're credible, they very quickly embraced a framework that provides transparent regulation and holds everybody accountable, including penalizing those who were behaving inappropriately. But the vast majority of those who were behaving inappropriately and wanted a free playing field to do their business in any way they wanted, resisted, fought back, even sponsored opposition and all kinds of things through other regulatory processes. But we were prepared for that, and we knew that ultimately it would land in a firm regulatory process, and that's what has happened.
Interesting stuff. But in all of this, I also think as a person, how do we also manage their interest? I mean, the players in the industry, the operators, because it's important. They are in this to make profit.
Yes, and that's a very important question. Not so much as because they need to make profit, but they do provide a service that plugs a very important gap in community. And most of the people who borrow money from them would otherwise not be eligible for credit from the traditional institutions. And the traditional institution credit system doesn't work nearly as quickly, doesn't mostly provide unsecured credit. And so it's a very different track. And the business model is different and requires different applications. However, the trade-off cannot be compliance with law or exploitation of consumers. It is possible to do this business. it is possible that the interest of the operators are sufficiently protected and there are reasonable expectations to recover the loans that they write exist, even in a proper framework. And so that's what we're encouraging, that's what we're supporting, a framework that holds consumers or borrowers accountable to the lenders, but also holds lenders accountable. Remember, the abuse in the system was far more just than abuse of the people who borrowed money from them. It was abuse of third parties who had nothing to do with the transaction, who in reality have no privity and should have absolutely no business with the negative outcomes of a loan understanding that had gone bad. And so we needed to come in and define how the space would work, how the interest can be calculated appropriately, and what kind of loan recovery methods are legal and ethical. And so you can comply with all of that and still succeed. And those who cannot succeed in a proper, well-regulated environment are the exact ones that we want to exclude, while those who can succeed are the ones we welcome, they're the ones who would sustain and endure.
So those who are out, one way or the other?
They're out.
No way for them to.
At this point, because there's still going to be an ultimate broad and permanent regulatory framework that we expect, because this is limited and interim, we imagine that there might still be possibilities for others to.
Well, I was thinking about issues around rates, but I think rates has to do more with the financial space, and maybe the central bank would have to come in along that. But I'm still thinking that how can Nigerians be sure now at this moment that, okay, this is approved, this is not approved? There's a way we should be able to confirm that.
And one of the ways is exactly what we've done. We're publishing the information about those who are approved, and that would remain on our website when anything changes, including if we yank them off the approval list, we would also publish that information. The other piece is that we're working with their usual technology partners, the payment systems. Google puts their app on Play Store, which is where you can download. We're working with them, and they're making sure that they're not providing services or platforms to them unless they're approved by the interim regulatory framework.
At the raid, I saw that you went with some security agencies or partner sister agencies, and so how's that collaboration been since then?
Excellent. I think it's one of the models that have not been sufficiently explored in the regulatory space in Nigeria, and we've seen that there can be that synergy between law enforcement and multiple regulatory agencies. Actually, is one of the most remarkable, efficient, cost-effective, and clearest message to industry that there is a process and people must comply. I think this has been one of the best outcomes, working with other people, and we look forward to continue to do that. Because
this digital lending space, with what is happening in this country, going cashless and all of that, is a sector to really look out for. What's your projection regards to entries into that sector and the entire space? What are you looking at, let's say, in a few years?
I think the concept itself is a disruption. They're disruptors. I think they would disrupt the traditional lending system and some of the financial services as we know. So I expect that as the years come by, as the regulations get better, as people understand the space and work better, I think that there's a future for significant growth on the side of the business and significant service on the side of the consumers.
Sometimes when you always talk about infrastructure and all that, but let's talk about us as Nigerians. What's our role in all of this to those of us going to lend and all of that? Because we also have a role. It's not all about the operators.
I think consumers need to be responsible, and I think lenders need to be responsible. I think we must imbibe a culture of a reasonable expectation of paying back loans. But I think that modifying people's behavior is based on consequence. People must suffer a certain level of consequence when they don't behave appropriately. There must be consequences for failure to honor your obligations of fiscal irresponsibility. But those consequences cannot be abuse or violation of law. And so we must strengthen the credit system, must strengthen the transparency in the credit reporting system and make it more prevalent and more robust. And so that when a potential borrower is blacklisted as an irresponsible obligor, then they should not be able to have access to other borrowings and other types of financial services. Sure. The more we strengthen that and the more the financial institutions, whether they're digital lenders or the traditional banking institutions or credit card issuing companies, restrict access and services to people who have been determined in a transparent manner to be irresponsible, the more people will become responsible.
Interesting stuff. Well, having you in the studio and it's a public holiday, I know a lot of work is going on. So let's talk about something else before we let you go. The power sector, I know you've been doing a lot with NERC, and all of this, a lot of issues that has to do with consumers. But update us, what is the FCPC? What is new and Nigerians need to hear about? Because we know a lot of work is going on behind.
Thank you. And one of the newest things for us is at the FCCPC is strengthening our continuing relationship and collaboration with the NERC to the point where we can start a very broad level of enforcement across the board of the meter cap, the cap estimated billing rules. I think that that's going to be a game changer because companies will become more responsible. You need to somewhat incentivize the companies to truly go out there and meter people. So long as estimated billing can be more profitable or beneficial than metering people, everything else we do about it will be rhetoric. We must incentivize. And one of the ways of incentivizing is making sure that these estimated billings are capped to a reasonable extent, where the discos or the entire value chain recognize that they're more profitable by making people pay what they've really consumed. I think that's the most important thing. I think the discos continue to behave irresponsibly for the most part. They behave so irresponsibly that they give everybody a bad name. The entire value chain has a bad name. The generators have a bad name. The transmission people have a bad name. Even the regulators have a bad name. And quite frankly, it's because the discos are irresponsible. Irresponsible in the way they bill, irresponsible in the way they provide the services, much more irresponsible in their lack of responsiveness to their consumers, and irresponsible in the way they exercise their powers to restrict access by just yanking people off the system and being abusive. We just have to fix that. And I actually think that one of the most discouraging things to commerce is criminalizing conduct in commerce. But one of the most important things to commerce also is prosecuting conduct that restrains, or slows commerce down. We need to get to a point as an entire society where we're bold enough to look at some of the conduct that is coming out from businesses or operators, especially the discos, and look at what part of this is criminal and have the appetite, the will, and the desire to actually take them through a criminal process. And many of these people are businessmen. They don't want to be taken through a criminal process. Some of the chief executives of the discos, they're not connected with some of these issues that happen. If we can hold them accountable, if people start confronting the possibility of going to jail on account of lapses that are occurring under their watch, then I'm sure, I think it was the Speaker of the House of Representatives, Honorable Bajabi Amila, who tried to introduce criminalizing some of this conduct. And my thing is, I thought that was, it was born out of the frustration that his constituents feel. And maybe we don't need legislation that criminalizes, but we must be able to hold people accountable, and where their conduct is really exploitative and violates other laws, let's call it what it is. It's not mere commerce to exploit people, especially with a public utility such as electricity.
Touching stuff there. Wrapping up, I would like to say that what level of complaints do you receive now at the moment? Because I know that Nigerians are more aware of the FCCPC than it used to be before. So what level of complaints do you receive and how do you manage it?
It's quite a job, and we're continuing to receive more and more complaints every day.
Yeah.
And many times people say to me, it's because you're failing, that's why there are more complaints. I said, no, actually it's because we're succeeding. People are coming to us because they're beginning to find that there's someone who can at least do something about it. But electricity continues to by far be the worst. And because of the conduct of the electricity people, even we seem ineffective in our work. More recently, banking has become a very strong, especially the electronic systems, and understandably, there's been a lot more transfer and pressure into electronic banking and cashlessness, but the banks need to wrap up whatever this is and respond better. Aviation is the third, and aviation has gone down a little, but delays and cancellation have become a new frustration again.
It's so sad. Well, it's good to have you in the studio, Executive Vice Chairman, Chief Executive Officer, Federal Competition and Consumer Protection Commission. So, Batudurukara, thank you so much, and do have a great Easter holiday.
The very same to you.
All right, then.